the human animal is amazing at making plans, at modifying its brain if it wants to. But the human brain and the human animal are also dreadfully bad at doing what's best for us.
Right.
Because of this, what I think it comes down to is the fact that our reward systems are not designed for things that are just good for us. They're designed for things that optimize the progression of our species, but they will grab onto and ratchet into any behavior that makes us feel good. And so the human brain is really not optimized for making best choices. Let's say you want to be less anxious. You want to learn a new language. You want to be more functional in some way, presumably. The key thing is to bring focus to some particular perception of something that's happening during the learning process. And the reason for that is that there's a neurochemical system involving acetylcholine. And it comes from these two little nuclei down in the base of the brain called nucleus basalis. All day long, you're doing things in a reflexive way. But when you do something and you think about it very intensely, acetylcholine is released from basalis at the precise neurons that were involved in that behavior, and it marks those for change during sleep or during deep rest later. So for people that want to change their brain, the power of focus is really the entry point, and the ability to access deep rest and sleep. Because most people don't realize this, but neuroplasticity is triggered by intense focus, but neuroplasticity occurs during deep sleep and rest. Thoughts are spontaneous. You can't control them. Negative thoughts, traumatic thoughts, bad thoughts, trying to suppress those is futile. If there's one message I can send people, it's just don't even work at that, but work at the process of introducing thoughts as almost like you would introduce actions, because we can introduce thoughts. And Carol Dweck has talked about this, that positive self-talk is not the same thing as growth mindset, because positive self-talk is almost always linked to the ultimate outcome. If I'm losing badly in something and I tell myself I'm doing great, I know that I'm lying.
Yeah,
there's no dopamine release from that. And a lot of the self-help wellness culture of the 80s and 90s was like, it's impossible to be in a bad mood if you're smiling. We wouldn't have any depression on the planet if that's true. There's probably some feedback from the face to the brain, but it's not that simple. But the idea that you can self-reward the effort process is extremely powerful. Because what it means is that if you can recognize agitation, stress, and confusion as an entry point to where you eventually want to go, I do think that even just mental recognition can allow people to pass through it more easily. They think they're doing something wrong. And then rewarding yourself when you achieve any milestone, like running to a particular location if you're trying to run a long distance, and then registering that as a partial win. What we know is that the dopamine that's released in response to that suppresses the total amount of adrenaline and gives you more room, more time, more energy to run in the running example. And this is anchored in a real scientific result. So last year there was a paper published that essentially was asking why any human or animal quits at any behavior. Now, certain behaviors, like I can't lift a car unless it's a very small car. I can't lift a car. But if we're talking about running, or we're talking about long bouts of work, the question is, why do we quit? Like, what is that? And it turns out that every time we exert effort, a certain amount of noradrenaline in the brain is released. And there's a sort of a counter in the brainstem. And at some point, enough noradrenaline is released, and it shuts down cognitive control, deliberate control over the motor circuitry, and we quit. That's it. But the thing that can restore those levels, or can sort of reset those levels lower and give us more gas, more mileage, is dopamine. And it makes perfect sense because our species had to move against very challenging things in nature and in terms of in culture at every stage of our evolution, including now. 2020 is a good example of this. And when a good example would be, if you're really slogging it out and things are miserable, just think like the worst family vacation, everything's a disaster, or a very hard physical event, and someone cracks a joke, you almost immediately feel a sense of relief. You see this in the team that wins the Super Bowl. Both teams slogged it out. You have to believe they were both at max effort the entire game. Look at the team that wins. They have extra energy. They're jumping all over the place. So it can't be physical energy. It can't be glycogen related. It's not ketone related. It's nothing in the body in that sense. It's dopamine's ability to take that level of norepinephrine and smack it back down. And so we can learn this, right? I mean, I think this is where there's real power. Like in your story, or the story that I'm familiar with, from your book, like the ability to push through those pain points is something that we really can export to other aspects of life, because it's the same neurochemicals that are involved. So when you get to a particular location, or maybe I recall, a portion where you're feeling lousy, you're injured, or you feel like you're hurt, and you can reframe it mentally and think, I'm actually still on the ladder. I'm still holding on to a rung. I know at least that much. I'm still breathing. I know that much. And the lift that we get is not some psychological pump up. It's a neurochemical thing. It's dopamine suppressing norepinephrine and saying, you're on the right path. You can keep going. It's a permission to keep going. That it really doesn't matter if you come at something from a place of joy and love, and that would be wonderful. But there's a whole other set of ways to approach this that involve slogging through the discomfort, the doubts, the wish for things to be different, and starting with behavior. Yeah. And it's incredible because if you think about sensation, perception, feeling, thought, and behavior, actually the way to control our nervous system and feel the way we want to feel is to run that backwards. Behavior, thoughts. So if you change your behavior, then generally your thoughts, your feelings, and your perceptions change.
Yeah.
And everyone tries to come at it from the other end, but he's figured out through whatever process led him there and incredible life circumstances, how to run it in this direction of behavior first. Yeah. And I really think that if neuroscience has anything to offer, it's some understanding of what the underlying chemicals and neural circuits are. But the sooner that the human animal, the human species can start to understand that our feelings and our thoughts and our memories and all that is very complicated, but that when behaviors are very concrete and they are the control panel for the rest of it. I don't want to relegate feelings. Feelings are extremely important. I don't want to relegate perception. They're extremely important. But when it comes to wanting to shift the way that you function, to get better or to perform better or to show up better or to move away from things like addictive behaviors, it's absolutely foolish for any of us, me included, to think that we can do that by changing our thoughts first. It's behavior first, thoughts, feelings, and perceptions follow. People who are paralyzed in fear or that have a hard time initiating, sometimes the key is to raise the level of stress and agitation. This is why deadlines are so effective.
Right.
This is why fear is so effective. This is why that deer gets up out of its, nice little den and starts to move, because it feels a certain level of agitation. If that agitation isn't high enough, we will not move forward. And so especially in the US, we have a culture in which stress has been created. These ideas around stress is that it's terrible for us, when in fact stress is designed to move us forward towards these action steps that are rewarded, which then move us forward. Some people are just hypo-aroused. They're just not motivated enough. And those people would benefit greatly from cultivating practices like superoxygenated breathing. Mm-hmm. So this is something along the lines of like Tummo type breathing. So rapid, and we look at this in the lab, we're actually running a human study on this now. So 25 or 30 deep breaths through the nose and out through the mouth, then exhaling the breath and holding, learning how to self-generate adrenaline. That's what you're doing when you're doing that.
Some version of the Wim Hof technique. Or
that's what that is.
Brian McKenzie talks about.
Right. An ice bath is doing the exact same thing. Stimulating adrenaline response. It actually improves the immune system. There's a published paper on this. Releases adrenaline, which buffers the immune system against infection. But getting good at taking yourself from low energy to higher energy. And then learning how to compress your focus. And I'll talk about the focus thing in a minute. Some people are so agitated, the monkey mind, they got too many things going on and they're thinking, okay, they're trying to sit down and write. I suffer from this. And I'm feeling like, wait, I've also got this person I need to connect with. And I'm kind of being drawn off course by not being able to put the blinders on. And so the reason I think breathing is so powerful is that everyone has a diaphragm. And it's the immediate link to the body. A lot's been made of the vagus nerve. The vagus is the path between the body and mind, but the vagus is very slow. The vagus nerve calming is what you experience when you eat a really rich, carbohydrate-rich meal, or you've had a long day and you put your feet up and you're finally relaxing. It takes minutes to hours to kick in, whereas the diaphragm is real-time control over your brain state. So the brain knows what the body is doing by how fast the diaphragm is moving. It knows its overall activation state. So when you breathe quickly, those 25 or 30 breaths, the brain says, oh, I must be alert. I'm going to start secreting some noradrenaline. And when you breathe slowly, that level of noradrenaline drops down. So it sounds so simple, but I think it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that my lab and Mark Krasnow's lab at Stanford and other labs elsewhere in the world have started to identify the neurons in the brain that are linked to breathing and how those two things relate to one another. And I think everybody should have a kit of tools that they can use to bring themselves down and ramp themselves up. When there's a certain amount of adrenaline in our system, our pupils dilate. Remember, the eyes are not connected to the brain. Our eyes are actually 2 pieces of central nervous system. They are 2 pieces of brain outside the skull that were designed to control our overall arousal state. And so we can talk about this as it relates to sleep and sleep quality, but when I bring up the level of adrenaline in my body through breathing, or let's say I see a troubling text, or let's just say I just use a very Goggins type approach and just figure out the most painful, inspiring for me reason to do it. You know, it sounds vague because obviously, David, I don't know what goes on in your head, but a tremendous respect for your ability to do this. But he just ratchets himself out of that ditch and puts himself in motion. The pupils dilate. And when that happens, our visual system actually enters something that's a little bit more like portrait mode on our phone. There's a process called accommodation, and your ability to focus on one thing visually actually becomes better, and your ability to see everything else blurs away. And that's the ability to just see that screen of text, or that if you work on pad and paper, to just see that pad and paper. And then as you start writing, what people don't realize is that mental focus follows visual focus. Now, in blind people, it's slightly different. It follows auditory focus. But in most people, your visual focus, as you bring that into really sharp relief, that image of your book, and you stare at it, you're going to feel some agitation and your mind's going to be jumping all over the place. But if you wait just a couple minutes, the rest of the world will disappear. I think this is sort of like the flow state people are looking for. But remember, the gate of entry is one of you have to wade through some sewage before you can swim in clear water. Right. That's the way I always think about it. But the visual focus is what brings the rest of the brain into cognitive focus. And people in the martial arts understand this. You've probably experienced this running when you're feeling exhausted and you can just concentrate on one milestone and get there. You can almost bring that into what you're doing is you're linking that to the dopamine circuitry. You're saying that thing is the milestone, not winning the race, not some other thing outside this immediate environment, that thing. And when you're able to start capturing these peripheral circuits, meaning the body, the diaphragm, the visual system, then you start getting past this whole idea of mindsets, and it really becomes about the body setting the mind. And this is where I think when you say action leads the rest, right? What you're saying is grounded in real neurobiological data. You're high-performing elite military, your high-performing athlete, your high-performing academics, your high-performing business people, they actually have practices that they use to regulate themselves in order to not just perform better, but sleep better. And not just to sleep better, but to listen better. Not just listen better, but incorporate ideas that allow them into states of creativity and states of mind that really lead to new and exciting ways that humans can interact.
And what is play? Play isn't just movement, although it includes movement. It's giving things everything you've got, but keeping it in perspective. It's that sweet spot of enjoying life and trying really, really hard at it at the same time. It's essentially what we all strive for. And there are these incredible cases throughout history. Famous scientists, because I grew up in a house where people, revered scientists like Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winner. He's most famous for bongo drumming naked on the roof of Caltech. And he became an amazing artist in his 60s. And he developed all sorts of other skills. And he always had this childlike way of looking at the world. He never let himself get stuck in his ways, never became a curmudgeon, and a remarkable man. And that's something that if you come away with nothing else, I encourage you to do that. You want your brain to change, stay light, stay loose, but give it everything you've got. It's tough, right? It's tough. So there's 3 kinds of general themes of meditation. I'm not an expert in meditation, and then I promise I'll wrap up, which is the first thing what I recommend just trying. Try it and let me know. Send me an email and let me know how it goes. Is one meditation, very short, 5 minutes, where for one breath, you close your eyes and go internal, and you get behind, and some people call it the third eye, right? I'm gonna get the language wrong, but we all know what we're talking about. You get inside your breath. And then the second thing you do is you focus on something at a short distance. There's a powerful system in your brain when you focus both eyes on a single point, like a watchmaker making a watch, or you're reading. That state is accessing very specific channels in your brain that are very different from the one that when you close your eyes, okay? And it's called a vergence eye movement when you put both your eyes on the same thing. And then the last one is the one that we get a lot of here, that feeling, awesome feeling when you go out to the beach or you're on the top of a mountain or you look at the horizon or you arrive in New York City if you're me and you just go, oh my God, and you're defocused. And that's when these ideas, the creativity kind of spontaneously geysers up from below. But then you have to get back and you need to get to work on something. And so what's been very powerful, and we're putting patients through this, or subjects in brain imaging, is this way of accessing all these different brain states is really about accessing different notions of space and time, trying to get access to your whole brain. And it's a short meditation. I recommend just one breath at each of these kind of stations, in your mind, up close and focusing on your hand, and out. And I'll repeat that a few times during my morning, or maybe once or twice during the day. It's quick, and we're getting remarkable feedback from the people that are doing this about the kind of state that it puts them in, both engaged and present with the bigger picture. And in the end, it's all about the bigger picture, right? Because it's about not just what you do with your life, but how you're going to create good in the world.
You know, an animal that's thirsty goes out looking for water, and when it finds that first drop of clean water, dopamine is released. But maybe that's not the big lake that it needs, but that's going to tells it it's on the right path. And dopamine naturally causes neuroplasticity of whatever brain circuits were active previously. So it says, hey, whatever I did to get to this point, this milestone, not the finish line, that is something that I might want to repeat reflexively in the future. I might not want to have to work so hard to do that. Now, the cool thing about dopamine, many cool things about dopamine, and then it has a dark side. And we should talk about the dark side, because even if, and of course the dark side can be associated with drugs of abuse like cocaine and things, but actually there's a even more sinister dark side that I think a lot of people fall into this trap. So the great things about dopamine is it rewards us and it gives us energy. And when I say energy, I don't mean glycogen, I don't mean glucose, I mean neural energy. And the reason is effort of all kinds, whether or not you're writing with a pen, whether or not you're racing uphill with a weight vest, or whether or not you're, slogging it out through any discomfort, is generally associated with the neuromodulator adrenaline, also called epinephrine. Okay, so adrenaline in the body it's called adrenaline in the body. It's released from the adrenals. And then epinephrine in the brain is released from a couple places, but there's one particular place for the aficionados. It's called the locus ceruleus. It's in the brainstem. It wakes us up. It gives us a sense of urgency, and it's about effort. And it doesn't care if you're doing something out of love or out of hate, out of revenge. It does not care. These are neurochemicals, and they don't care about you or your life experience, but they are in your brain and they are the engine. It gets you going, and it's the effort molecule. But the problem is, too much epinephrine or adrenaline eventually triggers literally a quitting circuit. There was a study published in 2019 which showed that for every bout of effort, a bit of adrenaline or epinephrine is released. And once those accumulate enough times, it's like spending money on an account, a set of cells in the brain, they're called glial cells, activate, and they turn off voluntary control. This is the reason why if you're running, you eventually might just say, that's it, I give up. It's the despair moment, and it's a chemical moment. Now, we could go deep into that, but the important thing for now to understand is that dopamine allows the brain and the body to tolerate higher levels of epinephrine and to continue in effort, as well as pushing down that level of epinephrine. Likewise, if you suddenly have the moment where you think you're at a breakthrough, not a falsely created belief like, oh, I'm performing well when I'm not performing well, but you have a breakthrough like, oh my goodness, I think I'm onto something. Yeah. You feel that more energy, and that's dopamine in action. And the beauty of dopamine is it's very subjective. Sure. There are chemicals that will release dopamine in the body, but it is very subjective. And so I always like to give the example, people always say a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. But what's missing in those common phrases is that the key is to reward each bite subjectively. Or let's say you're full, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, you can't put it in more effort. if you subjectively reward and you say, I'm on the right path, effort is the path. You develop what my colleague at Stanford, Carol Dweck, coined growth mindset, which is not just the belief that you can be better, but growth mindset at its core is about deriving dopamine release from the effort and strain process. It's about enjoying friction. And this is what people like you, David Goggins is a famous and shining example of this. And there are others as well, of course. So dopamine is your best friend in mitigating or making sure that the effort process is not self-limiting. And you have to regularly dose your behaviors and your thoughts with this dopamine association. And people get very hung up on this. They're like, wait, how do I know if I'm doing it right? Well, it's a skill you have to learn in your mind, because thoughts are spontaneous. They are like pop-ups on a poorly filtered internet, but thoughts can also be deliberate. I can decide to tell myself, look, I'm straining, but I'm going to reward this. I'm going to tell myself I'm on the right path. And the brain and the body don't know the difference. And this is not lying to yourself. This is not saying, oh, I'm really back on my heels, I'm performing poorly. It's not telling yourself you're performing well. It's telling yourself that performing itself, the verb effort, the verb of performing, is what you want to reward. Now, some people, they are uncomfortable with the fact that effort is the first gate that you have to go through in order to build this pathway that involves norepinephrine or adrenaline and epinephrine. And I sometimes people will jump on me about using norepinephrine and epinephrine interchangeably. I know they're not the same thing, but today we're just going to broadly describe them as systems in the brain and body, not get too down in the weeds. But the idea is you've got effort. You can associate that with adrenaline, epinephrine. You've got dopamine, which is your internal reward system, and it can be externally rewarded. So this is very important. There are intrinsic rewards and extrinsic rewards. There's a beautiful study that was done at Bing Nursery School at Stanford. I had nothing to do with this study, in the mid-70s, where they took kids that like to draw, and they then rewarded some of those kids with just a little star, like kids like, the shiny star makes them special, for drawing. Then they took away the star next day or the next day, and the kids that liked drawing just for the intrinsic pleasure of it, they drew less. So so these reward systems can attach to external things or internal things. I have a good buddy. He's friends and co-founders of this company Made4 that you talked to Blake Mycoskie about. His name is Pat Doss. He's a former Navy SEAL. And he and I were giving a talk once to a bunch of people, and we were talking about reward processes in the brain and how SEALs do it and what neuroscience thinks. And so the key is learn to attach reward to the effort process. I'm not David Goggins, psychologist, but I do know David, and he's come out to my lab before. We've had some conversations. I don't know what his process is, except as he's described it. But I have the sense, based on what I know about neuroscience and knowing a little bit about his story and having read his book, that he's learned to attach some sort of internal reward mechanism to the pursuit and friction process. It's not about feeling good about some external milestone. It's about learning how to tap into this engine that we have. And I actually do believe that in knowing some people from the special operations community, that this is actually one of the things that they are selected for, is not just grit or resilience. It's actually this ability to reward oneself internally in their mind as a way to buffer the effort process. It gives them more gas, more of an engine. And it's not just special operations. People that make it through cancer treatment, people that raise a special needs child or make it through a tough stage of economics in their life. Many people are probably in that situation right now. Sure. It's about learning how to take that strain, the feeling that you're being something or some force or some life force is trying to push you back on your heels, and learning how to use self-reward, not delusional thinking, but self-reward as a means to get more energy to continue to plow forward. That, a lot of people, hashtag growth mindset is one of the most popular hashtags in social media, but most people don't actually know what it means. And again, this is Carol Dweck's discovery, not mine. It was discovered in a group of kids that were doing math problems or other kinds of puzzles that they knew they couldn't get right, but they enjoy doing them, and they perform exceedingly well on lots of sorts of tests of that sort.
when there is the right answer, of course. And so what they do is they're wired for effort. They're wired for the puzzle, not for the solution. And when I say puzzle, I don't mean the noun puzzle. I mean the verb for being puzzled. It, for them, feels good. And so we need to think, if we're talking about the nervous system and we want to make it actionable for high performance, whether or not it's in business or sport or otherwise, we want to think in terms of processes, not events, and verbs, not nouns. So growth mindset as a verb, as an action item, reward as a verb, not just as you're going to just pat yourself on the back. Like it's what you internalize. It's a process. That's how the neural circuits that underlie reward get stronger. And the beauty of the brain is that you have this thing of neuroplasticity, which is its ability to change itself throughout the whole lifespan. And the more you practice this, the better you get at it. And it does not mean you're walking around talking delusionally about how great life is when everything is terrible. It means you might even be very stoic. You might be, hopefully you're very rational, but you have the energy to continue to push forward. Whereas other people are going to be dropping out because everybody shows up gritty and resilient and they watch their inspirational, aspirational story. One of the big motivations for me being here today and in general of my lab is to try and make these concepts from psychology and personal development and high achievement to make them what we call operational, meaning give them definitions that people can grab onto and apply and not just have to watch, 50, everyone loves the Rocky movie. I mean, it makes you feel really good. It makes you feel like anything's possible, but you don't always have access to that.
So adrenaline and norepinephrine they're the molecule. It's the same thing really, but it's the molecule that's released in the brain and body that makes you want to get up and move. It's actually the molecule of stress. It's the molecule of agitation. It's the molecule of moving you from one position to a new position. It cues your body that something has changed and it makes you want to be in action. That's why when you get stressed, your hands might shake, your breathing quickens, your heart quickens. It's a neurochemical trying to move you away from your current position to a new position. Very ancient system in the brain, very powerful. The dopamine system is often discussed because it's the molecule of reward. Like when you achieve something, you get this feeling of well-being. But dopamine actually is the molecule of motivation. Dopamine is the molecule that's released when you're pursuing something that's outside the confines of your skin, that you're reaching for something in the world, that you're aspiring to something. And I'll add a third chemical. Serotonin is a reward chemical as well, but it's the molecule that tends to be secreted in the brain when we're happy with what we have, and it tends to make us want to stay still. So you can start thinking about things like gratitude or the feeling after a big meal or seeing your dog or me seeing my dog or, holding a loved one or spending time with people that you've already formed a connection with. Those tend to evoke the release of neurochemicals like serotonin, oxytocin, et cetera. The dopamine system is all about what's out in the world that you're going to go pursue. And again, this is a very ancient system. Mother Nature put these systems in us and designed them to be pretty generic so that if I fell in love with science, I want to pursue science and the various things that involve a life of science. For somebody else, it might be sport. For somebody else, it might be literature. For somebody else, it might be business. Whatever it is that sparks your curiosity, dopamine is released as you move toward the thing that you seek. And it's really about rewarding you for movement towards things that are away from your physical body. And this could be conceptual too, not just, in the room. So we've got these different chemicals, one that makes you want to move, one that makes you want to stay still, one that rewards you for going out and moving from your current position. And it makes sense why Mother Nature would wire us that way, because if you think about it, if you have, let's say you were thirsty and you're going to feel agitated. You're going to get up and start looking for water. And then let's say you see a stream, but it's a muddy stream. But there you get some dopamine release. So you continue up that stream so that you would eventually get to the clean body of water. We needed rewards dished out along the way. And the rewards, if you think about it, you're not drinking that water. The rewards are chemical. They're coming from within. So when you say what's drive, drive is the combination of norepinephrine and dopamine. But I mentioned the serotonin system in that it makes us happy with what we have because it has a certain replenishment feature to it. It allows us to continue down the path of pursuit. It is a sore and bad mistake for people to always just be in a mode of drive and pursuit. And actually, just one other thing about this is that if you look at certain drugs of abuse, you find that they tend to fall into one or other camp. People who take cocaine and methamphetamine, it heavily causes the release of norepinephrine and dopamine, and they get very anxious to get out and go pursue things. People who do drugs that tend to cause a lot of release of serotonin. So these would be things of the, marijuana, psilocybin, these kinds of drugs tend to make you pretty happy with what you've got. You want to go into kind of rest and digest and eat mode. So there's this kind of push-pull between these. I'm referring to these as the extremes, but these are chemical systems that were designed for the purpose of adaptive living. It's just that drugs of abuse hijack those neurochemicals and put our body into states of one or the other extreme.